thank you again for joining us, and I turn things over to Michelle Rafik.
Great, thanks, Kyle. It's great to see some familiar faces, and I'm excited to be here today. I was thinking last night and today that although Zoom can be really hard as a presenter, because I really like walking around a room and seeing people's faces and getting their reaction, I do really like not having to drive in the snow and not having to walk around in the snow in nice dress shoes. So I'm going to take that as a benefit of Zoom presentations. Let me switch my view here just so I can see more people. Okay. Oops, there we go. So what we're going to talk about today is basically self-care and wellness. And first let me tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you I don't know, I do see a lot of familiar faces, but I'm a Colorado lawyer. And I started out as a trial lawyer for a number of years, and then I went in-house at Ball Corporation for many years. I was with Ball for 12 years. I also was an HR director for Ball. And I kind of got on the coaching path because I took a leadership course through an executive coach at Ball. They put a select few people through a leadership course with an executive coach. And I was sort of like, oh, okay, I'll give it a try. I mean, but I don't know, I'm not really sure if I'm even gonna like this. And it really ended up being life-changing. And not just in the way that I worked, because I feel like it took my practice to the next level, but also in helping me live a better life as a lawyer. So basically a few years after that, I decided to resign from Ball, and I did some serious work getting certified as a professional coach, and decided to open up my business to bring coaching to lawyers. And I coach on a lot of different things, depending on what barriers you see in your practice and where you feel like you want to go in your practice. But we do talk about self-care with certain clients. And some of the things we talk about today have been so useful for me in performing better and also living a better life. So as we go along, I would love it if you ask me questions. I can't see everyone with the way Zoom is set up. And also it's really hard for me to monitor the chat. So I feel like we're a small enough group. If you wouldn't mind just unmuting yourself and breaking in, that would be great. I also have a couple of areas where I'll pause to give people time to ask a question. But also, if you have a question that you don't want to ask in front of everybody, my information is right on this page, and I love talking about this stuff. So please feel free to just send me an email and for whatever questions you may have. Okay, so let's get started. So here's what we're going to cover today. First, why self-care is important for lawyers. Lawyers specifically, not just everybody in general. And then self-care is one of those buzzwords like wellness, self-care. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it really means from my perspective. And I like to style this as a talk on what are the common barriers to wellness and how do you overcome them? Because I think sitting here and talking to you for an hour about how do you take care of yourself? I mean, we all kind of know the basics. So how I really like to approach it is, what are the barriers to staying well and how can you actually overcome them? And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about practical ways to stay well. And I say practical because I know we're all busy professionals, and I think we really have to be practical if we want to work on our wellness. So why should lawyers focus on wellness? I don't know if many of you saw the ABA study that came out a few years ago. It was pretty concerning. Lawyers struggle with substance abuse and mental health issues at extremely high rates. And if you look at other professions, lawyers struggle with these issues even more than other professions. I know a lot of lawyers, friends, clients, and I know that these are issues we all deal with. So part of wellness and self-care is helping yourself live a better life, even if you're not struggling with these issues, which many of us are not. But when you talk about lawyers and wellness, part of the issue is, I think, it's a chicken and an egg kind of an issue, But part of it is our job. I mean, we're trained to scan the horizon for the next threat. And especially when in certain legal jobs, but I remember when I was a trial lawyer, you know, giving counsel to clients on issues that might become litigation. I mean, that's, your radar is up. And then it was almost even worse when I went in-house, because I would always joke and say, when I was a trial lawyer, the case came to me. It was already a mess, right? And my job was to help solve it. When you're in-house, you're involved super early in the discussions. So I would always say, yeah, now I have the ability to actually cause the problem or contribute to the problem. So part of, I think, lawyers, you know, struggle with anxiety, stress, depression is just the practice of law. But also, there's a lot of things baked into the practice of law that don't help either. So we don't have very much control as lawyers over our clients, over opposing counsel, over the judge, over the case, but we're always expected to produce outstanding results. We're also commonly exposed to trauma, especially in certain areas of the law. Prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, personal injury lawyers, family lawyers. There's a lot of secondary trauma in our profession. And also kind of the chicken or egg argument, driven perfectionists are drawn to the practice of law. And I say that raising my hand. I am a perfectionist. We're gonna actually talk about perfectionism as a barrier to wellness. And it's something I've battled my whole career. So I think that all of these things contribute to the fact that lawyers have a high level of stress and have higher levels of mental health issues and substance abuse issues than even other professions. I also wanted to, I feel like I'd be remiss without having a wellness presentation and not talking about where we are right now. I mean, we're in COVID. So not only do we all have these pressures of our job and life, but we have COVID on top of it. And that's causing, you know, it's compounding a lot of our stressors. There's uncertainty, there's fear, there's insecurities. I mean, I know this personally. I have a 10-year-old and I have a pretty busy schedule. And the other night at 10 o'clock, we got the panic warnings from the school saying, your son can't come to school tomorrow. He's quarantined because another kid in his class isn't feeling well and the COVID test is pending. So then it's sort of like, woo, you know, not just managing this poor 10-year-old who wants to go to school, but also managing what are you going to do for the whole day. So I've talked to a lot of clients about this, because I also find that it's hard for people, and then they are making it even worse because they're beating themselves up because it's hard for them. So I've been telling all my clients, this is hard. Even if you don't have COVID, you haven't been sick, you haven't lost a loved one, you haven't lost a job, give yourself some grace, because it's okay that it's hard. So that's my COVID spiel. Now I want to talk a little bit about what actually is self-care. So let's think about it like these two cars. So if you're going on a road trip, say you're driving from Colorado to Boston and down the East Coast. I mean, that's a long drive. That's a lot of miles. And you're saying to yourself, all right, I need my car to be reliable. I need it to go for a long time, for long periods of time. I need it to be nimble and agile, because I have to drive with all those crazy New Yorkers, which I say in jest because I'm a crazy New Yorker who grew up driving in New York, and you just never get it out of your system. I mean, you just don't. So I have to drive with all those crazy New Yorkers. I need my car to be nimble and agile. I mean, what are you going to do before you leave for this road trip? You're going to make sure there's air in your tires. You're going to make sure you have an oil change. You're going to make sure your car is tuned up, because if you don't, halfway through, you're going to end up like this white car, not like the sports car. So when we think about it in that way, we're like, yeah, of course. Of course. I want to be the sports car on this trip. Well, that's what self-care is like in life. And we don't equate that to our own lives. Like, you think about everything you require yourself to do in a day, the hours you're awake, things you need to do as a human, as a lawyer, and not putting some air in our tires and tuning our engine and putting gas in the car and actually using higher grade gas. It's crazy, right? Because what I see a lot of the times with people who are burnt out is they've neglected to do all those little things and they end up like this white car on the side of the road. So I like to talk about it. I mean, people come to coaching for a lot of different reasons, and generally getting better about self-care and wellness is not one of them. But we talk about it a lot because it's really the foundation for an effective professional. But as we'll talk about, I think there's these misperceptions of what self-care is. It's like, oh, especially here in Boulder. So if I want to take care of myself and be well, I have to be up at 5 a.m. running up Flagstaff and drinking kale smoothies, which if you do that, I think that's awesome. But at the same time, that's not wellness and self-care for everyone. So I wanted to just set the stage by saying this is not one size fits all. And also it takes consistency and continued maintenance to be on a wellness journey. But there are so many benefits to engaging in wellness. It's kind of like, I mean, greater happiness, less stress, better health, better relationships, greater resilience, which is the ability to bounce back after stress, which is really important for lawyers. I mean, you think about the stressful deal, the stressful trial. I remember the last time I went to trial before I left law firm life, wandering around the office literally at 2 a.m., searching people's offices for chocolate. So we have these really stressful situations and we do need the ability to bounce back. So if you look at all these benefits, it's sort of like, yeah, why don't I take the time to do this? Well, there are some common barriers to wellness that I wanted to talk about today because I feel like it's important to talk about what gets in the way of being well when you're talking about wellness. Because it is kind of simple. We all know how to do it, but we don't. So why don't we? The first barrier is we don't know what makes us happy. We're going to talk about that. The second is perfectionism. And the third is what I like to call, and I'm sure I didn't invent it, but what I like to call the busy mind. So let's start with barrier one. We don't know what makes us happy. This dog in this picture makes me happy. I mean, he's the cutest thing in the world, but he doesn't look very happy. So that's why I put him in there. So the science of happiness is this new cool science that's come out, and it's spearheaded by this woman called Dr. Laurie Santos, and she's a Yale professor. And she started this class because she saw how unhappy her students at Yale were, and she felt like it was even worse than when she was at school. So she started this course at Yale called The Science of Happiness, and it was so popular. There were thousands of people signed up for the first class. I mean, she didn't know if anybody was going to show up. But it was so popular, they basically had to give it in like a convention center. But I took this course. You can take this course yourself on Coursera. It's like a 14-week course. And it was just fascinating. And the biggest point I took away from it is what the science shows is we think we know what makes us happy. So we strive for these things in our life, and we strive and strive and strive and stress and work really hard to get them. And in the end, they don't make us as happy as we think they do, or they don't even make us happy at all. So it's this vicious cycle of striving to be happy and then ending up not being happy. So when you look at the science that this course teaches us, there are things that we think make us happy. The prestigious job. So maybe I want to be a partner at a specific law firm, or the job with the most prestige, the houses, the cars, the money. If you look at each of these individual things, either they don't make you happy or they don't make you as happy as you think they will. And part of it is because as humans, we have this amazing ability to adapt. So, I mean, I know it in my own life, like you really want that new car and you're like, oh, when I get that car, I'm gonna be so happy. And then 3 months after you get to the car, you're kind of like, I have this car. We adapt to these experiences in our lives so they don't make us as happy as we think they do. And I'm sure you've all, or many of you have seen the studies that show after you make a certain amount of money a year, making more money doesn't make you happier. And that, don't ask me what the amount is because it varies based on where you live. So I'm sure in Boulder, it's going to be a lot higher than other places. But once you hit that level, making more money isn't making you as happy. I was pretty shocked at this because the science is pretty good on studying people after they've gotten these things and seeing that they're not as happy. So what does make us happy? If you look at what they studied, the prestigious job doesn't necessarily make you happy, but using something called your character strengths at work does. So this is a website. It's the VIA character, I forget the name, the total name of the organization, but I think it's like the VIA Character Strengths Organization. And they have these 25 character strengths that they say everyone has. And the science bears this out. But if you know what your top strengths are and you use those at work, you're much more likely to be fulfilled. So what I do when a new client comes in generally is I have them take, there's a free test at this website. It's a 15-minute test. I have them take it so they can kind of see what their top strengths are. And a lot of times if you're having a rub at work, like you're not really happy, it's because there's a character strength you have that's not being met. So I would encourage you all, if you have 15 minutes, to go take this test and take a look at it. Because if you're thinking about how can I be fulfilled at work, and a lot of my clients come to me looking for the answer to that question because we think, you know, my work life can be better. If you're looking at that, then this is a really interesting thing to look at. I also go over values with clients. You know, what are your values? A lot of us really rarely ever ask ourselves those questions. And I think of character strengths as sort of like values in action. But I think we all have this tendency to look for the most prestigious job when that's not really what's scratching that itch. It's really living in your values and using your strengths. Another thing that makes us happy is valuing experiences over possessions. And the studies on this are really strong. So they say if you have a certain amount of money, instead of buying the possession, maybe the handbag or, and I don't spend a ton of money on handbags, but something you really want to buy, use it for a vacation, use it for an experience. Not only does it make you happy leading up to the experience, it makes you happy during and after the experience. Also valuing time over money. I'm careful about this as well, just because we all need to work for a living. So, you know, if you say, oh yeah, Michelle, it'd be nice to like lie on the beach in Mexico for the rest of my life. But really, as much as you can, valuing time over money. If you have the option to work more and make more money versus take that time, the studies do really show that valuing time over money makes you happier. And then connecting with others. And this is a really interesting area because this, I think pre-COVID, when I was doing this research, which was pre-COVID, I was like, yeah, I guess that kind of makes me happy, connecting with others. I'm an introvert. I'm an extroverted introvert, but I'm an introvert. So this was even a harder sell for me. I was like, yeah, I like people, but I need my alone time. I think after COVID, people get this because when most of our social interaction was taken away from us, we realized how important it really is. And the studies are fascinating. They put these people who commute on a train and they tell them, hey, you need to go talk to someone on the train. And for me, I used to take the bus to Denver to work. And I was like, oh God, put me on the bus, give me my coffee. I don't want to talk to anyone. But they actually made a group of people talk to other people. And that group of people were, you know, assessed before and after. And it turned out that they were happier when they talked to somebody else on the train. And you may be thinking, yeah, that's nice for that person, but the poor schlep who was talked to on the train was probably like, but they even tested those people and they were happier. So it really shows that connections with others make us happier, and it doesn't have to be a long drawn out thing. It can be a brief interaction. So I've tried to incorporate this in my life. Even during COVID, and I have tried longer connections. So, you know, walks with friends with masks on, Zoom interactions. But I've also tried little things like making the effort when I'm walking the dog around the neighborhood to talk to my neighbors, even like 2 minutes, like, hey, Joe, how's that project you're working on? Which is hard for an introvert. And I feel like it has made a difference. It's just made me feel more connected. So just some tips, I think, from the Science of Happiness. I did write a blog post on this. It's on my website if you're interested. And also it was published in the Bar newsletter. But I would just think about it. Is your life in alignment with your values and priorities? I have a good friend who lives on the East Coast, and she's a lawyer, and she was struggling. She's single, and she was struggling because she was saying to me something feels off, and we had a conversation about it. And she values her family and friends so much, and all of her time was being spent at work. So it looked to me like her life wasn't in alignment with her values and priorities. She thought like working would make her happy, and that's not what did. And also keep in mind, it really does take putting some air in your tires. So happiness is not, there's a great quote by one of the scientists that studies this, that's like, happiness is like a leaky tire. You just have to keep putting air in it. And I think about that all the time. It's like you don't take a shower and expect to be clean for the rest of your life. You have to take showers every day or every couple of days. So when you're working on your happiness, think of it that way. Think of it as little things you can do to put air in the tires. And we're going to talk about that at the end when we talk about practical ways to be well. And I also really recommend Dr. Laurie Santos's podcast called The Happiness Lab. It's short episodes of like 20 to 30 minutes, and she talks about things like this study about connection and the train. And I find it's really good to just help remind me of things I need to do to keep myself happy. So I'm going to pause there because this was our first barrier, which was we don't know what makes us happy, and just pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions. And to take a drink. Okay. Like I said too, feel free to email me on any of this. I really do love to talk about this stuff. Okay. Let's talk about barrier number 2 to wellness, which is perfectionism. I think of these school children because as coaches, we're not psychiatrists or psychologists. We don't go look back at what made you how you are. But personally, I know that perfectionism was ingrained in me from the time I was a young child. My father is Italian. My maiden name is Ramondo, and he's from Italy. So I always joke, you know, he ruled with the iron fist. And it was so bad on perfectionism that my parents were divorced. And when my mom would get my report card, if there were 1 or 2 grades that were kind of iffy, she would actually white them out and retype the grade before she mailed the report card to my dad, because he expected perfection. And I think that's true for a lot of us. It's ingrained in us as children. So what is actually perfectionism though? It's holding yourself to really high standards and never feeling that what you do is good enough. It's really a vicious cycle. It's like, this needs to be perfect, and then you can never meet that standard, because in reality, there is no perfection. So everything you do never meets your standards, and another vicious cycle. But you might be wondering, how does perfectionism relate to wellness? Well, perfectionism is a big topic. It relates to a lot. For perfectionists, it relates to a lot of things in their life and in their work. But it really, really can hinder self-care, because the cycle really is, you're a perfectionist. A lot of times you fear failure because you're a perfectionist and everything has to be perfect. So you procrastinate, and then you stall out. And the way this can relate to wellness is, all right, you say, I want to be well, I want to exercise, kind of the easiest example, but I don't have an hour and a half a day to do weights and cardio. So feeling in your head like if you're not putting an hour and a half of like hard work in a day, then that's not going to be good enough. You just never start. And like I said, this is a cycle that happens. I'll give you an example outside of the wellness arena, because it relates to the science of happiness. But so I struggle with this. So I took that course on the science of happiness, and I was like, you know, this is really cool. And I don't think people know this. A lot of people know this. So I sometimes write blog posts, usually every couple months, and I send them out to my mailing list. I was like, I really want to write a blog post on this because I feel like if people knew this, they could live happier lives. And part of my mission as a coach, as a lawyer coach, is spreading the word on some of these things to other lawyers. So I said, I'm going to write this blog post. And I did nothing. And I was coaching with my business coach. And he was like, well, why haven't you done it? And I was like, because I'm not Lori Santos. I'm not going to be able to write a really good blog post on this. It's going to stink. And it was sort of like, that was it. I was being a perfectionist about this blog post. And it took, and I mean, weeks. This went on for weeks. And you know what I did? Nothing, because I was making it out to be this big thing. And that's what really, really can happen to us with wellness if we have perfectionist tendencies. So there's some ways you can manage this. The first is to notice the tendency in yourself. Like I said, I was blind to it before. And I mean, I do this stuff for a living before my coach was like, huh, that's really interesting. And the funny thing is, a couple months before that, I had written a blog post on perfectionism. So it was funny that I didn't see it. But I always think the first step to tackling something going on in your life is just to be aware of it. So notice. Another way it can come up for people is if you can't finish projects. For me, it usually is I can't start them. But if you can't finish projects because it's never good enough, that's another way perfectionism can come in. And then investigate your beliefs around perfection, because I think if you think about it rationally, nothing's perfect. And now I'm a really careful parent with this, where I tell my 10-year-old all the time, I'm like, Sam, I don't want you to be perfect. There is no perfect. I want you to, in most situations, do your best, but really investigate what it means to you to be perfect, and think about, you know, that whole saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And then set realistic goals when you're starting a self-care regimen. I mean, really realistic goals. Small, manageable steps, and keep in mind that starting is generally the hardest part. I'll do this with myself and exercise, because sometimes getting on the treadmill and running for 45 minutes just seems to be too much. So I'll be like, all right, if you get on the treadmill and you run for 5 minutes, then that's my small, manageable goal. And usually I go for a lot more. With that blog post I was talking about, I committed to my coach. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 30 minutes putting my research together. And then the next day, I will look at the research. And then the next day, I'll write an outline. Granted, I didn't have a deadline for this, so I could take it really slow. And then the next day, I'm going to write for just an hour. You know what? I'm going to write, and it's going to be crappy. It doesn't even have to be good writing. And honestly, it came together so fast once I just told myself that's what I was going to do, because those small, manageable steps are really important. Also, recognizing that change is hard. So our body, our mind, everybody around us want us to stay the same. It's called like homeostasis, this tendency to want to be afraid of change and to want everything to stay the same. And what's a part of that is that backsliding is normal. It's not failure. So I'll have a client who is doing really great on their goals for months, and we get on a call and they're like, it all fell apart. And a lot of times the tendency is to then say, I'm not going to be able to do this. And I'm always like, nope, nope, nope. That's not true. That's not the case. This is normal. Like, change is normal. So sometimes you're going to fall off, and then you just have to get right back on. So realizing that, I think, is important. And it's even something I go over in one of my first meetings with my clients is, look, no matter what change, whether it's wellness or whether it's meeting your goals or whether it's leadership, realize that sometimes you're going to fall off the wagon because change is hard. So any questions or comments on perfectionism before we move on to our next barrier to wellness? Okay. I can't see very many people because of the way Zoom is laid out. So I'm going to try to change it a little bit there. There's some faces. Awesome. It's hard on Zoom to present without seeing people. But so it's nice to at least see a couple faces. Okay. Of course, now that I did that, the slides won't. Okay, number 3, the third barrier, the busy mind. If you've heard me speak before, I do talk about mindfulness a lot. I think of the busy mind as in this train station. Your mind is just like, this was one of the main things I worked on when I started coaching, because I had a really busy mind. I mean, type A perfectionist from New York, started out as a trial lawyer. You can imagine, right? My mind was, and this is one of the things that not only helped me in my life be more calm, but also in practicing as a lawyer. I mean, when your mind isn't so busy, you're a lot better. You're a lot more productive. You're a lot more efficient. You're a lot calmer. You're a lot more creative. And the way I describe the busy mind is it's like you're constantly thinking about the future or the past. You're never really where you are. So this has probably happened to you guys in this call. You all started with me, but some of you've gone to the past. You're like, oh yeah, that client I just got off the phone with was a total pain and it's making you feel anxious. And then some of you have gone to the future. Okay, what am I gonna do after this call? It's gonna be 5 o'clock. I've got my CLEs, but what are we gonna do for dinner? That's normal. That's just sort of the normal way your mind works. So, but what mindfulness and presence is all about is actually spending more time in the moment. So not being in the past and the future, but spending more time in the moment. So what's really important about this is if you work on it, you can spend more time in the moment and your busy mind just seems quieter. Kind of like you're on that beach, but not really. If the train station is the busy mind, that beach is the quiet mind. And I've been working on this for years and I can't say my mind is always that beach, but sometimes it is. Okay, so how is the busy mind related to wellness? Presence or mindfulness is what I would call the top tool, the top wellness tool in your toolkit, the top tool to decrease stress. It leads to so many wonderful things. And like I said, a lot of people think this is soft, this is woo-woo, I don't want to sit on a rock and meditate. But it's not only helpful in just life, it's helpful, it makes you a better lawyer. Absolutely 100% makes you a better lawyer. It makes you better able to focus in meetings. I mean, I was a trial lawyer, the ability to focus in depositions, in trial, I mean, it's amazing, even just in meetings. If you have a busy mind, a lot of times you're missing a lot of things. If you can quiet your mind, you really can be more present and a better lawyer. But also just the things like sleep quality. The studies show more mindfulness makes you sleep better. Feelings of work-life balance, job satisfaction. It really does a lot of great things for you. So how can we be more mindful? You're here, so many of you probably aren't totally eye-rolling at me when I talk about meditation, and plus I think meditation has come a long way. But when my coach at Ball first told me about meditation and recommended it, it was like 2012, and I was like, I don't meditate. What are you, crazy? I don't do yoga. I run. You know, I kind of beat myself down into the ground. But I was in this leadership group with a few other people at Ball, and there was 2 women and maybe like 6 men. And some of the men actually started meditating. And we would go into our check-in meetings and the things they were saying about meditation, I was like, I really have to give that a try. And so I did, but I started at 30 seconds. I was like, if I meditate for 30 seconds for 30 days, that will be a success. And it was so helpful even at 30 seconds that I quickly upped that. And I was also kind of going it alone with a timer, but all of these meditation apps are just fantastic. So I love the 10% Happier app. That was started by this newscaster named Dan Harris, who had a panic attack on air. And he was admittedly doing drugs at the time, which is kind of he admits is a funny part of the story for him. And he went into this mindfulness journey. And now he has a couple of books I have at the end as resources. He has this app. He has a podcast. It's fantastic. And the reason it's fantastic is he's a huge skeptic. skeptic of mindfulness, skeptic of meditation, and he takes all of these concepts from the view of a skeptic. Like if any, he brings some of the most amazing meditation teachers onto his podcast, and when they say love, he's like, oh, you know, I don't like that word. So I love him, and his app is fantastic. I also, it's a paid app, but I subscribe to it. So if anybody wants, I can send you a guest pass for a 30-day, it's like a 30-day free trial. So email me and I'll send that to you. And then Insight Timer is another one that's free. That can be a little more woo-woo, but I find it can be helpful. And then there's a ton more, I'm sure, that I haven't even listed. But I think when you're starting meditation, it's helpful to use an app. But then what if you are skeptical, like I was, of meditation? And I do have some clients who actually want to work on mindfulness, but they don't want to meditate. And all hope is not lost. So there's ways you can bring awareness into your everyday activities. So I like to mention that, like, yoga, that's a moving meditation. If I do yoga, I count it as my meditation, but you don't even have to do yoga. So I've had clients who have really good success with mindful walking. So the way this can work is I do this on hikes sometimes. It'll be like the last 5 minutes of a hike, and I realize I haven't meditated in a while and I'm just kind of scattered. So for the last 5 minutes, I focus on exactly what I'm doing. And it's like bringing all of your 5 senses into exactly what you're doing. So if I'm on the trail, I feel my feet, like right foot, left foot on the trail. So I use my senses. What am I actually seeing? Oh, there's a pretty cool tree. There's my dog running off into something. I can feel it's cold. I can feel the wind on my face. And then when my mind goes to a thought of, hey, what about this client that's coming up? I just bring it back to my body. I bring it back to what I'm doing. You can do this around your office. I started doing this when I was working at Ball. I had a kind of a big office, and I would just walk from side to side in my office, like right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. And then when you have a thought, you just bring it back to what you're doing. You can also add little breaks throughout your day. So little awareness breaks, I like to call them. So, a lot of times we're going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And when we actually used to move from meeting to meeting to meeting, but now we're going from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, that when you get into a meeting, you can be in the last meeting still, or you could already be in the next meeting. So a lot of times it's really helpful to just put your hands on the table and feel yourself sitting, and just in your head say, I'm in this meeting. There was a beer giant, I think it was Carlsberg, that actually instituted a whole mindfulness program where, as a company, they did things like this, where when they started the meeting, they would be like, okay, we're at this meeting, feel yourself sitting in this meeting. I wouldn't recommend you doing that if everybody around you isn't on the same page, but you can still do it in your head. But their corporate profits and productivity just shot through the roof from doing things like this. So if you are hesitant about meditation, then I would start with kind of mindfulness for skeptics, as I like to call it. Okay, any questions or comments on mindfulness before we move on?
Hi, Michelle. I have a question.
Hi.
Sorry. Hi. Could we get back to the busy mind thing for a second? Because what do you recommend if that happens in the middle of the night, which happens to me all the time? I'll wake up and I'll go through each of my cases in my head for hours in the middle of the night, and I can't stop. Do you have a specific thing for nighttime busy mind?
I do deep breathing. So, because I get that a lot too. I'll actually start to meditate in my head. I'll just do like breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. That tends to help me a lot. Another thing that was really helpful for me on sleep was Dan Harris on the 10% Happier podcast. It was probably about 6 months ago. He did 2 full episodes with a sleep specialist. And I mean, they were fantastic. And they talked about a lot of the links between sleep and wellness. And so I would refer you to that too, because he had a lot of different tips. Like if you're awake for more than 20 minutes, you have to get up and leave your bed. And I don't do that because
I hate to do that.
but it might be helpful to give that a go. I also got a sleep number bed because it like tracks when you're kind of awake and not awake. And I found it to be motivating to try to get to bed earlier. But yeah, personally, I will actually go into deep breathing or a meditation when that happens. And also what I noticed was I did dry January, not this year, but the year before. And the one really, really crazy outcome of that for me was I didn't do that at night anymore because I wasn't drinking wine. And I don't drink a ton of wine, but whenever I cut out alcohol, it seems to cut my anxiety. And it was so surprising to me that I actually Googled it. And it's a huge actual benefit. They say that alcohol actually messes up your ability to regulate anxiety. And part of how that would show up for me was waking up at 3 a.m. and not just waking up, but I don't know about you, but when I wake up at 3 a.m., it's like the world's gonna crash and burn. Like, yeah, it's like worst case scenario. So I don't know, I found that was really helpful. But yeah, those 10% Happier podcasts on sleep were just amazing.
Thank you.
Sure. I think there was another question.
Yeah, this is actually just a little more of a comment, although I definitely echo all of the sleep stuff because one of the worst occupational hazards is not getting a good night's sleep sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really appreciated that you talked about kind of walking meditations or yoga as methods, because as someone who's super fidgety, sitting still for that amount of time to get a good meditation in is really hard. So it's just nice to think of these other options as mindfulness practices.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. It took me a long time, and some people don't get there and don't ever want to get there either. So I really feel like, yoga is such a meditation. It really is.
Hey, Michelle, this is Patricia Riley. I posted the app that I use is this Breathe app, and I posted on the chat. The guy he's English, and so he uses this word whilst all the time, which always makes me laugh in the middle of whatever meditation. I always crack up when he goes whilst. Don't try this whilst driving is what he says. But he has a whole sleep section of meditations that are shorter to longer, shorter meaning like 20 minutes to an hour. And one of the things that he does, some of them are talking, some of them are like whispered books, which is a weird concept, but it works. They whisper a book like a reading to you.
Wow.
And some of them are just music, but the music is specifically, they're doing constructed where you won't recognize this because it'll just sound like kind of music to you. But it's resetting your brain into delta wave cycles, which your brain recognizes as like hitting the reset button, and it's where you need to be to go to sleep. And so my comment was directed to Karen, because as an older person, I have like cyclical insomnia, and I do the same thing where I'm awake and then I start churning on the cases. And so I've been reaching over and plugging my headphones into the phone and starting one of these delta wave meditation apps with the music. And so far it's worked. I've woken up with my headphones jammed in my ears. The only other thing I'll say is, with the night that I first did it, I should have probably told my husband, because he got up in the middle of the night and came over and stuck my phone in my face like that, because my phone was lit up bright. And he's like, "What is this?" I was like, "Oh my God." So yeah, so I learned I had to keep my phone like pressed down, but I've been using it, and it was something I tried. I didn't have a lot of kind of, belief in it one way or the other. I was just at my wit's end with my sleep quality as I got older, and with the hormonal challenges and everything else getting worse and degrading, and, finding myself at what I call the bottom of my proverbial well. And I'm in family law. And so that's a dangerous place for me to be because I'm hand holding all day long. And so I really got to watch kind of where I'm at with my levels. And so I would try it. You can do a free 30-day, just like you said, Michelle, I think with Breathe, BREETH.
That's awesome. That's thank you for sharing. Because I also think it's important to try things and find what works for you. I don't do the guided meditations at night, but I've had people who have told me it's great. Also yoga nidra, which I haven't tried yet, but I've been meaning to, which is kind of like sleep yoga from what I'm told. But yeah, and I think it's so important to just try what works for you. And also one other thing I wanted to say about meditation that kind of marries the concepts of perfectionism and meditation is I caught myself some days just not meditating because I was like, I don't have 20 minutes to meditate. And it struck me that I was being a perfectionist about meditating. So now it's like, do I have 5 minutes? Like, can I take 3 deep breaths? Like, it all counts. So I think we have to be careful of that too with meditation. And one other thing on meditation is some meditation teacher I heard said, I had a problem with meditating in the beginning because my mind would wander. And they were like, every time, that's the practice. Every time your mind wanders and you bring it back to the meditation, you're getting better at meditation. And I was like, yeah. So that was something that helped me as well. Okay, so let's talk about some practical ways to take care of yourself. I really stress the practical because I've had some women lawyers who have talked to me about the fact that they'll go to something, and male lawyers too, and it'll be like, all right, here, you need to do this like 3-hour morning routine. And it's frustrating because I don't have time for a 3-hour morning routine. I don't have time for a morning routine other than maybe getting up early and working out if I can, because I have a 10-year-old. And a lot of people who don't have kids don't have time for a morning routine. So I think it has to be practical. And I also like to stress it's not cookie cutter. So it really should be customized to you. So when you think about yourself, what keeps you grounded, recharged, and energized in your life? I mean, there are a lot of examples. These are just some I threw in together. Exercise, of course, sleep, journaling, being connected to others, yoga. Self-affirmations have really helped for a lot of my clients. People think it's cheesy, but it works. Journaling too, and if you don't like the word journaling, you can just call it writing. Also doing good for someone else. That was a surprising thing that I think came out of the science of happiness research. If you are unhappy, and you do something good for someone else, it makes you happier. A lot of us know that, but even in giving money, so they would give people $25 and say, all right, either spend this on yourself or spend it on someone else. And the people who spent it on somebody else afterwards were happier than the people that spent it on themselves. So it isn't all about drinking green smoothies or exercising, 3 hours a day. It can be a lot. Wellness and self-care can be a lot of different things. So what I always say is you should really know your top 10. What are the top, and this is something you can do in like 10 minutes. What are the top 10 things that fill you up? Like if you're a cup, they fill you up. They don't drain you. They fill you up. So a good way to figure that out is when you do something, how do you feel right after? So I say that because a lot of us scroll, like I doom scroll news sometimes. I don't have social media partially because the science of happiness and everything I learned about how social media can really hurt your happiness, but that's a whole different topic. But I have a lot of friends who will doom scroll or just scroll their social media. And how do you feel right after? Does it make you feel good? Does it fill you up? Because if it doesn't, it shouldn't be on your list. It's things that like you feel good after you do it. And then my advice is aim for 2 to 3 a day, and not 2 to 3 hours a day. But this is part of like putting the air in your tires. If you can incorporate 2 or 3 of these things a day, you're going to be keeping yourself well. You're going to be going a long way. If I can do more, I do. But sometimes for me, like nature, being in nature is huge on my list. And there's a lot of scientific research to that, but I can't do a hike every day and I can't get outside every day. So sometimes in nice weather, it's literally sitting on our deck for 5 minutes and just being present to what's happening, listening to the birds, feeling the sun. So it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. I think it's just important that you're doing 2 to 3 of these a day, or even 4 to 5 if you can. That's kind of my advice on keeping the air in the tire and keeping it practical and realistic for people. Does anybody have any comments or questions on that piece? Yeah. I'm trying to see who I'm seeing. I don't see everybody's names, but someone just raised their hand. Go ahead.
Well, I just have a couple of thoughts. The first one is that your to-do list will outlive you. And no matter how hard you work and how many times you go through your to-do list, you will die and it's immortal. And to-do lists are nice, but they also shouldn't run your life. Like, you shouldn't be so full of structure that you must always be run by your list. And I think sometimes our to-do lists make us, they feed into the perfectionism of ourselves, because number one, like every law school student, are going to read every book, every case the very first day of law school, get the books and do it all. And, we're going to do it all. But the reality is you can't do it all. You just have enough time. And what I think we don't do is we feel guilty for taking time for ourselves, because we should be, making money or doing something for our family or whatever. But if you commit 15 minutes of a practice every day to invest in yourself, like a savings account, and put it at the top of your to-do list so that well-being actually topped your list when you die, and stick with it. And then you will find that you actually have more time than you think. And then you will get into the thing like, oh, well, I could actually do 30 minutes. I mean, if I cut out if I do this, then, you just physically experience not doom scrolling, because you're doing what you committed to do, to take care of yourself, to contribute to yourself, and to make sure that when you die in the top of your to-do list, taking care of yourself was there. It's a priority. It's not just something that, is passing. It's really a visual, in action priority.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the more you realize how much more time you have to do things that you love. And another thing that I just wanted to say is, remember when you were 10, and remember all of the fun stuff that you did when you were 10, because there are studies that talk about how powerful girls are at the age of 10. They're doing music, they're doing sports, they're making friends, they're curious, they're adventurous. So think about what it was like when you were 10, and think of all the things that you love, and then pick one and commit 15 minutes a day to being 10 years old.
Yeah.
And no failure, no success, no nothing, just an experience.
I love that as an alternative way to pick your top 10. Think about how you were when you were 10. I'm probably going to borrow that. It's fantastic. I love that. And when you talked about productivity too, I do a talk on productivity. I think I've given it for the bar, and you nailed it. One of the things I talk about is, where does your time go? So a lot of people will inadvertently spend an hour or 2 a day on social media. And when they realize what's happening, they can take some of that time back for wellness and self-care. Yeah, things that fill you up.
I have one other funny story. For whatever reason, I decided that I would sell Mary Kay Cosmetics a long time ago. You guys probably don't even know what that is.
Oh, I do, definitely.
So as part of the training to become a consultant, Mary Kay training has you take your 40-hour calendar for the week. And the first thing that you mark out on your calendar in hot pink or whatever your favorite color is the time for yourself. and you stick with it as a practice. And I just think that's so funny. I was a failure at that profession, and I had to become a lawyer instead. But I always remember that lesson, which has helped me greatly. So maybe when you do your calendar your own time first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love both those points, or all those points. Now, I also wanted to just give you guys some resources. If there's anything in particular you're interested in and you want suggestions on, just email me. But some really good books for perfectionism are Brene Brown's like Gifts of Imperfection. She is fantastic. Anything she writes is fantastic. Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset versus Fixed Mindset, Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. A lot of us beat ourselves up, men and women. So I have some male clients who have read that and just really, it's really helped. And then some books for beginning mindfulness. I started with Search Inside Yourself, and it's a funny name, but Chade-Meng Tan is the engineer who started Google's mindfulness program, and now he's like a international expert. And Search Inside Yourself and Joy on Demand's his newest book. They're both really good for beginning mindfulness, and they're easy reads. He's really funny and self-deprecating. And then Dan Harris's books are really good too if you are a skeptic. And the podcasts I've mentioned as well, the Happiness Lab by Dr. Laurie Santos and 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And that was all I had. Let me take a quick look at the chat. I love the to-do list. Sounds like a laundry pile, Carolyn. Can I send that book list around by email? Yeah, what I'll do is I was gonna send the presentation to Kyle, and he's gonna send it around to everyone with the CLE when he gets the CLE certification. So if you want it separately, I can send that too. Just send me an email. Otherwise, you should have it in there too. So does anybody have any other questions for me or anything else? I really enjoyed being here. I love talking about this. I love, I just think it was so helpful for me. So hopefully you guys found some helpful nuggets in there as well.
Yeah, so this is probably too big of a question in the time we have. But earlier on, you mentioned working with people in trauma being one of the things that often creates the need for self-care for all of us. To a certain extent, like, is there anything more specific that you would suggest for people who are dealing with a lot of vicarious trauma?
So I do try to be careful in that I'm not a licensed psychiatrist or mental health professional. I do think lawyers have a lot of vicarious trauma. So I think it's a really important topic to look at. I mean, my husband's a criminal defense attorney, and some of the stuff that people in the criminal world are exposed to is just crazy. But I don't have anything really specifically to point to other than stuff that, I mean, I would probably go towards Googling it, because I think there's just a lot of mental health professionals who talk about it and talk about it in a better way than I could. So maybe that is kind of my non-answer answer.
Okay. I just wondered if you had any tips or tricks that I may not be aware of. I do legal aid work, so yeah.
I would
all
say
the
me, from a non-professional standpoint, it's been mindfulness. And I don't have work trauma, at least not anymore. But when I was practicing, I did at Ball, we had some product liability stuff that I felt like exposed me to some traumatic images. But yeah, the trauma you have to go through in legal aid is huge. And for me, from a non-mental health professional perspective, it really has been mindfulness and trying to manage it that way. Because then I just felt like I was more in the present, which has been really helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, it's our time. It was lovely to be here. It was great to see some familiar faces. Like I said, please reach out if you have any questions or comments, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Great to see you.